الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. This lecture inshallah will discuss the threats that the Aqsa Mosque, Bayt al-Maqdis, which is the Islamic terminology or the Islamic name for Jerusalem, Al-Quds, that they're facing today. But this will be inshallah within a broader analysis of the situation in that part of the world. Now, since the first aspect or the first pillar of the lecture is about the threats of Al-Aqsa, this is the gateway to the subject. I want to start by stipulating that Al-Aqsa, Bayt al-Maqdis, which is again Jerusalem, are being threatened today on an unprecedented scale of Judaization. They're being Judaized while we're talking now. The threat is real. And before I continue, I want everyone to know why it's very important, why it's relevant to use Al-Aqsa and the situation in Jerusalem as a gateway to the broader analysis of the situation in the so-called Middle East. And the Middle East, we don't agree with the terminology, it's just a point of reference. It's not an agreement with it, because this is a colonial term to describe that part of the world. Because the Middle East in relation to the centrality of Europe at the time. So we do not accept that Europe is the center of the world, whether at that time or today. But this is again just to make it easy for us to follow up with the terminology and the terms that we'll be using. So why is it important to enter into this topic from Al-Aqsa and from the situation in Jerusalem today? It is very simple, because as we all know that Al-Aqsa, Bayt al-Maqdis, do constitute or do have a very religious significance in Islam. They're not our average city. Al-Aqsa is not an average masjid. As we all know that Al-Aqsa is the first Qibla for Muslims. Al-Aqsa is the second mosque in terms of establishment. And Al-Aqsa and Bayt al-Maqdis is the third sanctuary in Islam. So we're not talking about an average city. Meaning that when we talk about the situation in Al-Aqsa, we have to keep in mind that we're talking about the indicator of the situation of the Muslim Ummah. Because if Mecca, God forbid, to be attacked today or to be threatened, that will give you an indicator of the situation of the Muslim Ummah. Why? If anyone will dare to go and attack Mecca or to undermine Mecca or to violate the sanctity of Mecca, that means that the Muslims are not in a good position or in a good shape. If anyone will do the same to Al-Masjid Al-Haram, to Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi or Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara, the city of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, again that will give us an indicator that the whole Muslim Ummah is in a bad situation, because no one will dare to touch Mecca or Al-Madinah unless that the Muslims are not in a good position or in a good situation. And the same thing applies to the Aqsa, the furthest mosque, and to the city of Jerusalem or Bayt al-Maqdis, according again to the Islamic terminology. When Al-Aqsa is being threatened today, when the city of Al-Quds is being threatened today, that gives us an indicator that the Muslim Ummah is not in a good situation. Because again, we have three sanctuaries in Islam, three cities that are being emphasized for their religiosity and importance: Mecca, Al-Madinah, and Al-Quds. It is given. No other mosque has the same weight when it comes to the religiosity and the significance. No other mosque. The rest of the masajid that we know worldwide, wherever, regardless of how old they are no less, no more important than Al-Hijrah. They are the houses of Allah, they're very important, but we do not engage in a trip or go to visit in a religious trip just to go visit the Barbary Mosque or to visit the Hassan Mosque in Morocco, or to visit the King Hussein Mosque in Jordan, or any mosque on the face of the earth, and not any city, not any place, but these three places and three cities in Islam. That's given in our religion. That's given. So again, when Al-Aqsa is being threatened, when Al-Quds is being threatened, that gives you an indication of where the Ummah is today. And when we say that, that gives you an indication where the Ummah today is. So now we understand why what's taking place in Iraq is taking place today. Why what is taking place in Syria is taking place today. Why what is taking place in Kashmir is taking place today. Why what is taking place in Libya is taking place today. Why what is taking place anywhere, everywhere is taking place today. Because the Muslim Ummah is not in a good shape. It's not in a good position. Because the Muslim Ummah, if it cannot defend one of the three symbols in Islam, it cannot defend the rest. If you cannot mobilize the Muslims to move and to defend one of their three, the third religious city in Islam, you cannot move them to defend any other city or any other place in the Muslim world. That's why it is important to start from here. So as I said, to stipulate this, to put it on the table and to move on, before we come back to it, Al-Aqsa is being, the threat is real, the threat is unprecedented. The Judaization that is taking place never been on this scale before since 1967, June 1967, when the Holy City was occupied. For the first time since 1967, when Jerusalem was occupied, Al-Aqsa was shut down. No Muslim was allowed to enter to pray in the Aqsa Mosque for the whole day on October 30th, on Thursday. October 30th, about 2 weeks ago, or about 3 weeks ago. No Muslim was allowed to enter the mosque. You shouldn't say that the Palestinians weren't allowed. It is Muslims who weren't allowed to pray at the mosque that day. So no Muslim has been allowed to pray on that day for the first time. What made Israel, dare to commit such a crime against the freedom of religion and the freedom of people to worship? What made Israel dare to do such a thing that could have inflamed the Muslim world in just a few decades ago? Because now they can see and they comprehend what's going on in the Muslim world. They see that the Muslims are not in a good situation, and that's where I want to inject this situation, the regional and international equation, into the discussion. We need to broaden our frame of analysis. We need to broaden our understanding of our comprehension of what's taking place there, because otherwise we will not understand what is taking place exactly in Jerusalem and in Palestine. So let me try to shed some light on the international, regional and domestic equation. Now, if you look at that part of the world, let's go back again to this term, the Middle East, which again we don't agree with. And Abu Abdul Hadi, if I can ask for water, I will, because I feel I'm like Michael Rubio now. Was it Rubio? Yeah, okay. Who? Rubio, yeah, the senator, yeah, okay. So now let me go again back to the situation there to broaden this frame of analysis. Let's go look at the situation in the Middle East. If you look at the Middle East today, you will see that there is a serious attempt to redraw the map of the Middle East. And when I say redraw the map, I'm not talking only in a geographical sense. Not only redrawing the boundaries of the states that exist or that are located in that part of the world. Many people think that's what is taking place today, is the redrawing the map. Now Iraq might, God forbid, become 3 Iraqs. Yemen, God forbid, might become 2 or 3 or 4 Yemens. People think that Libya might become 2 or 3 or 4 Libyas. Well, there is a real threat, a serious threat that this could take place, yes. But unfortunately, this is not the only threat that we're facing in terms of redrawing the map. What they're trying to do is they're trying to create a new Arab. A new Arab meaning that they're trying to make of us a new people with a lower level of aspiration. Because after what happened during 2011, 2012, the so-called Arab Spring, no one anticipated before that Arabs might go in masses into the streets demanding freedom and dignity. People thought, if you ask just a few years ago, in 2011 or at the end of 2010, who's going to be the president after Mubarak, they will tell you his son Jamal. Why? Well, after Mubarak dies, his son will just assume the presidency. That's how it is. Who's going to be the president after Ali Abdullah Saleh? Well, it's his son Ahmed. That's how it is. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a monarchy or a republic, it doesn't matter. People couldn't predict any change because things were so stagnant in that part of the world. No one thought that things would ever move forward. Now suddenly this happens. Now this is not my discussion why it happened. This is not the topic that I want to talk about. But it did happen. It was a shock to these regimes, a shock to the international powers who suddenly saw that the Arabs can do something, can demand something. And the map that was created in 1916 in the Sykes-Picot Agreement now seems to be a burden instead of being an advantage for the colonial powers. So they want to divide it more and more, but not only dividing the place, but also dividing and conquer the aspirations of the Arab people. And that is what is taking place today. That is something that they're doing. They're creating the new Arab, the Arab who are very desperate. Who are surrendered to their fate, that they were created to be subjects. They were created to be oppressed. They were created to serve. So now they're trying to re-emphasize these assumptions in the Arab mind that this is why you were created. You're not allowed to cast your vote. And if you cast your vote and it brings someone who you don't like, we're going to punish you. Not only them who won, but we're going to punish you, as what happened in Gaza, as what happened in Egypt, as what happened in Tunisia. Because after another one, they were punished. They were punished. People were talking about, suddenly you have a chaos. Why do you have a chaos? Well, it's being engineered. Everything is being engineered in that part of the world. Again, to convince people that you have no place, nowhere to go, and you have no destiny but to accept what we tell you. Now, within this international, regional, domestic alliance and domestic reference to what is happening in Palestine or in Palestine, it has defined or designated an enemy. How you're going to justify what is taking place in there? You need to have an enemy to scare people, an enemy to mobilize your energy and your strength. So the enemy has been defined clearly to be quote-unquote political Islam. But I don't want it to be also confused here when we talk about the enemy being political Islam. Though we don't agree with the description of Islam as being political, but this is again not my discussion. The issue, the true enemy is not political Islam per se, it is political Sunni Islam. And I'm not saying this because I'm trying to one of the sisters asking, why am I not talking about Al-Isra and Al-Mi'raj? Well, this is not the topic of tonight. And we've talked many times about Al-Isra and Al-Mi'raj. We'll continue to talk about Al-Isra and Al-Mi'raj, but this is a different subject. We cannot keep repeating the same subjects. And that does not mean that we're undermining or, we're not appreciating the importance of Al-Isra and Al-Mi'raj. But this is one aspect, and we have to discuss different aspects of the issue of that part of the world. So now, as I said, they have designated the enemy or defined the enemy to be political Sunni Islam. Why political Sunni Islam? Because suddenly all of the unrest, quote unquote, is coming from the Sunni Islam. Here I'm not trying to defend or to endorse or to condemn. This is not my topic. I'm not taking positions on Al-Qaeda or ISIS or ISIL or Daesh or whatever you want to call it. This is not my discussion. But my issue is that they see that all of these movements are coming now, emanating from the so-called Sunni Islam. What happened in Tunisia, it is Sunni Islam. What happened in Morocco, in Jordan, it is Sunni Islam. What happened in Egypt, it is Sunni Islam. What is happening in Palestine is Sunni Islam. The war in Syria and the conflict in Syria, well, again, it's Sunni against so-called Shi'is now. Suddenly became defined in terms of sects as well. So Sunni Islam is the issue. They have defined it as Sunni Islam. And going back to this international, regional, let's go back to the international. We know who's speaking about the Sunni Islam as being the source of the problem today, Sunni political Islam. Well, it is the United States where we live. But let's see who are the regional partners. I don't know how many of you paid attention to the Wall Street Journal about 2 weeks ago that reported that President Obama sent a letter to the Supreme Leader of Iran, Khamenei, talking about the mutual interest in fighting ISIS or ISIL. Now suddenly you have a mutual interest between the United States and Iran. Now some might say, but ISIS is a problem. Well, again, if you will buy into the narrative of John McCain and Lindsey Graham, well, it is because of the failure of the Obama administration we ended up with ISIS, because it's not only that you did not support the Syrian revolution, you also put a veto that the Syrian revolutionists cannot be armed to defend themselves and to fight against the Syrian regime. So the Syrians were left with no options to defend for themselves. So it is a failure of the Obama administration. So Iran is part of the problem in Syria, and the Syrian regime became a proxy of Iran. So why not talking about fighting the proxy regime and fighting the source of the problem, Iran, according to this narrative in the United States? Why is it only ISIS? That gives you an indication. Well, let me reinforce this indication now. Let's look at what's happening, or before we get to another place, let's look at Syria itself. Who's fighting in Syria? Hezbollah is there, a Shi'i organization, a Lebanese Shi'i organization. Hezbollah now is speaking about itself as a partner on the war in the war on terror. Now Hezbollah is designated as a terrorist organization in the United States, but now Hezbollah is speaking as a partner fighting Sunni terrorism, and the United States is not sanctioning, not punishing, not trying to actually they're rearming the Lebanese army, which is under the influence of Hezbollah. Well, this is another indication. Let me give you a third indication. Look at what happened in Yemen. In Yemen, the Houthi took over a country. They swallowed the country. Now, when they took over the country, what did the United States say? The United States was mute, said nothing. They invaded Sana'a, they took over Sana'a, and you didn't hear any condemnation coming from the United States. Not only that, now when Al-Qaeda and the tribes start fighting back at the Houthis, our Air Force, the unmanned planes, the drones, start bombing whom? They're bombing the tribes. Well, I understand. If they bomb Al-Qaeda, well, we understand. There is a war between the United States and Al-Qaeda. But when you go and bomb the tribes who are defending their own territories from an Houthi expansion, that gives you another indication. Al-Houthi is a Yazidi sect, Shi'i sect, which is closer to the Sunni. They never were considered to be Shi'is, but under the influence of Iran, they became an Iranian proxy. So now you see them expanding in Yemen, and our own Air Force is supporting them, fighting whom? Fighting the tribes, the Sunni tribes who have nothing to do with the politics or geopolitics or Sunni or Shi'i. They have nothing to do with that. This gives you another indication. Now, let's go back to Syria. Now, when you look at Syria, there is a war in a city called Ain al-Arab or Kobani. Now, this is a Kurdish city on the borders with Turkey. Now, who's the only country is being pressured by the United States to send ground troops to fight the ISIS there? Turkey. Well, why Turkey? Turkey is a NATO partner. The United States says we're not going to send troops. Obama committed that he's not going to send combat ground troops in Syria or Iraq. Well, okay, we understand. The American public opinion is against it. Obama had made his presidency about disengaging from that part of the world by, pulling America out of these wars in that part of the world that were initiated by the Bush administration. So we understand. So why you go and pressure Turkey to send troops? Why not Iran? Iran occupies Syria, in fact, in Syria. So why not Iran? According to our Secretary of State, he says we don't deal with Iran. Good. Why not in Iraq then? Why they don't send their own troops in Iraq and fight ISIS? Because Iraq is theirs. It's not America's. It's Iran who owns Iraq today. So why not send their troops there? Again, we're not interested in Iran as a partner. Is that true? Then why are you pressuring Turkey? I don't know how many of you is aware of the campaign against Turkey here in the Congress, our Congress, and in the American media, to the point where in Congress and in the New York Times, which is a liberal newspaper, right? The New York Times called for the expulsion of Turkey from NATO. Why? The reasoning is that Turkey is being governed today or ruled by an authoritarian fundamentalist. That's their reasoning. Erdogan is an authoritarian fundamentalist. So that gives you another indication. All of this is happening while we are engaged in a grand bargaining with Iran. If you think that the grand bargaining or the negotiation that is taking place in Vienna is only about the nuclear program, Iran's nuclear program, you're mistaken. As one Iranian official, actually the deputy foreign minister, Iranian foreign minister put it, that this is not the core issue. The core issue is acknowledging and accepting the Iranian influence in the region and its interests. Its interest, as one of them put it, it's now the control for Arab state capitals. Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, Syria, Damascus, the capital of Syria, and now Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. Okay, let's go beyond Sunni-Shi'i issue, because as I said, it's not a Sunni-Shi'i issue. Iran saw an opening, so it's seizing the opportunity. And I shouldn't be blaming Iran just because it's acting in what it thinks its best interest, though it is evil, the politics of Iran. But this alliance is not only defined on the borders of Sunni Shi'i. The alliance also includes so-called Sunni states. Now, Saudi Arabia is part of this new alliance in the region. Egypt is part of this new alliance in the region. UAE is part of this new alliance of the region. You can add many other states like Jordan, but they're not as major or as influential as the three states: UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Those three states have declared that political Sunni Islam is their enemy as well. Who are their partners? Israel, number one. Israel. When Netanyahu says, the Israeli Prime Minister says that we are fighting on behalf of the quote-unquote moderates in the Middle East, including Arab and Muslim states, he was telling the truth. He was telling the truth. Let's go back to the aggression that took place in last summer when Israel started a war against Gaza. Let's go to the Wall Street Journal. If you remember that Kerry went to the region, he proposed an initiative to stop the Israeli attack. According to one official, one of the aides of Kerry who was with him during that trip, he said that we were amazed, we were so astonished to discover that the three Arab states, and he listed their names: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Emirat, and Egypt, were pressuring us, quote unquote, not to bail out Hamas, i.e., let the war continue on Gaza. Don't stop it. Let them destroy Gaza. Let them finish Hamas. Now, my issue is not Hamas. It's not a political Islam. My issue is that you have, for the first time, three states, Arab states, Sunni states, who are fighting or who are willing to support Israel to fight a Palestinian faction. In fact, killing the Gazan people, the average ordinary people there. Not only that, if you remember when Kerry wanted to go, Michael Oren, who is the former Israeli ambassador here in the United States, who's an American citizen who gave up his citizenship, now he is to become the ambassador. Now he's a senior advisor to Netanyahu, said that Kerry is uninvited. He's not welcome to come. And he said that we are not fighting a war for Israel. We're not fighting a war on behalf of all of the moderates. And they were, for the first time maybe in history or in the American relationship with that part of the world, you have Arab states aligning themselves with Israel against, not the Palestinians, against the United States itself. Because the president of Egypt, Al-Sisi, the leader of the coup, presented an initiative which was in effect a surrender document for the Palestinians. Kerry came with a better initiative. They rejected it. Israel rejected it. The Arabs supported them, and they told them not to accept it. They told the Israelis. This is again was reported in the American media, and I'm sure many of you maybe followed the debate or the tension that took place between the United States and the administration here and the Israeli government. So now you have this alliance. It's also include, and this takes us back to Palestine, the PA, the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is part of this alliance. Because if you look at the siege today, this embargo, this cruel embargo that is being imposed on Gaza and the Gazan people, if you think that the PA is exonerated from the crime, you're mistaken. The PA is part of that embargo. Now I don't want to take you back to history, but let's start from the end. Let's start from where things are. Now, according to the agreement that was reached to rebuild Gaza in Egypt, the conference that took place, the international conference in Egypt in October, they agreed that they're going to rebuild Gaza. But what is the mechanism? The mechanism is that the PA submit the names of those who are in need to the UN. The UN takes it to the government of Israel. The government of Israel has to approve every single name. Now there are more than 60,000 housing units that were destroyed, about 20 totally destroyed housing units. So now let's say one of the 20,000 people want to rebuild his house or to rebuild his or her house. Now they cannot rebuild their house because they need the cement. The cement needs to come from Israel. So now for them to get the cement, they have to go to the PA, submit their names. The PA will take it to the UN. The UN will take it to Israel. Israel will go case by case and will say, you know, X, no, cannot have a cement because he is a member of. But Y can't take the cement, but I'm not going to give him 20 tons of cement. I'm going to give him only 3 tons of cement. Why? Because that's the mechanism. The PA is saying now, yes, we agree with this mechanism because unless Hamas disarms, then there is no rebuilding of Gaza. And to disarm Hamas, meaning is to end what is called, whether you call it a resistance or terrorism. Now again, I'm not taking sides here, but to disarm Gaza, meaning that Israel have become victorious. It's no more Palestinian defending for themselves or trying to advance their aspirations. Okay. So now, this is the Arab and the Palestinian situation. Now, let me spend a little bit more time on the PA. Now, we've seen what's happening now in Jerusalem. As I said, it's being, for the first time, the threat reaches this level. For the first time since May, the Israeli Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, has been discussing a law or a bill that will eventually, by the way, become a law, to divide Al-Aqsa. Now, I'm not talking about the city. To divide the sanctuary itself, Al-Haram al-Sharif, to divide it in terms of time and place. In terms of place, it is already divided. Because with all of the tunnels that they have dug under Al-Aqsa, with their control over what they call the Wailing Wall, which is Al-Buraq Wall, according to our Islamic terminology, where the Prophet ﷺ, tied the creature that took him from Mecca to Al-Aqsa, to Jerusalem. From Jerusalem he ascended to the 7 heavens. It's called Al-Buraq Wall, the name of that creature. Okay, so now they already have control over that wall. And they already have dug under Al-Aqsa, under the sanctuary itself, and they have chambers there where they pray. So already they divided that place in terms of place. The issue is to divide the place in terms of time, meaning that the Jews will be allowed certain hours or certain days or certain times to pray at the Aqsa Mosque, and the Muslims will be banned, and in other days or other hours or other times, Muslims will be allowed and the Jews will be banned from praying in Al-Aqsa. Now this is what is taken, this is the formula that is being imposed by the Israelis in Al-Haram Al-Ibrahimi, the Masjid of Al-Haram Al-Ibrahimi in Al-Khalil. But again, Al-Haram Al-Ibrahimi, people claim that Ibrahim alayhi salam is buried there. Okay? Again, according to our Islamic understanding, Al-Haram Al-Ibrahimi is no different from Darul Hijrah. Doesn't mean that it's not significant, doesn't mean that it's not pure, doesn't mean that it's not important, because if you think Darul Hijrah can be, can be violated, then that's a problem. No one accepts any violation to any masjid or to any house of Allah Azza wa Jal. But again, if they have imposed this formula in Al-Haram Al-Ibrahimi, well, okay, it's an issue, it is a problem, a significant problem, but it is not as significant as dividing Al-Aqsa in terms of time. Because that plays into their argument that Al-Aqsa is not an Islamic symbol. It's not an Islamic symbol. That shows you where the problem is. Now going back to the situation, I have spoke about the Palestinian situation, I have spoke about the Arab and Muslim situation. Let's look at the Israeli situation by contrast. Now, if we're divided when it comes to our Aqsa, when it comes to our symbol, when it comes to one of our religious places on the face of the earth, now look at the other side. The other side is in a total agreement, right, left, religious, secular. They're all in agreement that Al-Quds should not be even divided. And when we speak about Al-Quds, Jerusalem, they call it Eastern Jerusalem, by the way. They're not talking about the entire Eastern Jerusalem. They're talking about a 1 kilometer part or space or area in Jerusalem, which hosts the mosque, the Haram al-Sharif, and the church in Al-Aqsa, in Jerusalem. So they're not talking about the entire Jerusalem. They're talking about only less than half a mile of area, which is of religious significance for Muslim, Christian, and Jews. So we're not talking, because they're against any division, any partition of Al-Quds, the projected, expanded Jerusalem, which is about 12% of the entire West Bank today. So they're not talking about any division of Eastern, Western Jerusalem. They're talking about the division, or they're against the division of this 0.5 or 0.6 square mile that hosts the religious places for the three religions. So now they're all united behind this. They're against any partition. Not only that, 3/5 of them say that we should not even negotiate over it, even to allow Muslims to enter the mosque, not to divide it. Now, you might think this is a right-wing issue. No, Ben Gurion said, the founder of Israel said, there is no meaning for Israel without Jerusalem. There is no meaning for Jerusalem without the Temple Mount. Now, he's a right-winger, right? What about Yossi Beilin, the author and the father of the Oslo Accords? He's called the most dovish in Israel. Yossi Beilin says that Mount of Temple, which is Al-Haram al-Sharif, means to us what Mecca and Al-Kaaba, that's his exact wording, mean to Muslims. So you see, the other side is united behind their aspirations while we're divided. Unfortunately, why you see that the only people who are standing to defend Al-Aqsa today and Al-Haram al-Sharif are the people of the same city, the Palestinians of the same city, with some Palestinians who carry Israeli citizenship. You know why they're able to defend Al-Aqsa today? Because you have no PA, Palestinian Authority Security Forces in Jerusalem. You think that I make up this? Well, according to the Israeli newspaper Yada'u Tahranot, that the Palestinian Authority is collaborating with the Israeli security forces to make sure that no intifada will take place because of Al-Quds. No intifada will take place because they're worried that this will mean the end of the PA. If this will tell us anything, brothers and sisters, it will tell us that the Israelis are giving us small doses now. They shut down Al-Aqsa for one day. They wanted to see the reaction. There was no huge reaction, not only by the Arab Muslims, by the Palestinians themselves, only the people of Al-Quds and some Palestinians who carry Israeli citizenship. Because the West Bank is under control by the Palestinian Authority. Gaza is being confined and isolated. So who's left? The Palestinians in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and some who carry Israeli citizenships. So they're looking, the West Bank did not move thanks to the Palestinian Authority. Gaza is isolated. The Arab in the surrounding countries done nothing. The Muslims didn't even hear about it. Or maybe they don't care. So they're testing the water. They're giving us small doses. What is being tested today will become a fact tomorrow if we allow this to happen. Now, because Brother Ashraf is telling me to finish, you know, if we want this to come to an end, or if we want Israel to think twice before it will try to Judaize Al-Haram al-Sharif and Al-Aqsa, we have to go to the first notion that I started with. If we, the Muslims, don't really believe that Al-Aqsa and Al-Quds mean to us as much as Mecca and Al-Kaaba and Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara and the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, nothing will deter them. Because if I tell you now there is an army advancing to take over Mecca or Al-Madinah, no one will stay seated here. Everyone will jump and will do something. But unfortunately, we're seeing what's happening to Al-Aqsa and nothing is happening. So this might give me a more dangerous indication that we might not really move if anything will threaten or anyone will threaten Mecca or Al-Madinah. Because it gives us an indication. The sister who asked me about Al-Isra and Al-Mi'raj, the connection is made clear between the first mosque or the sanctuary mosque, Al-Masjid Al-Haram, with the Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, the furthest mosque. The connection is not, it wasn't like haphazard. It was meant for a reason. Allah is telling us, if you compromise, if you will give up on Al-Aqsa mosque, that means you might give up and compromise when it comes to the sanctuary mosque. So unless and until we enforce this notion that what Al-Aqsa means to us, what Al-Quds mean to us, until and unless we start teaching our children that we have three symbols in Islam, three religious places in Islam, that three masajid that should be admired and protected by Muslims, we're not going to change anything. Because they are banking that our children, like the children who are sitting there, never heard of Al-Aqsa. But they know about Mecca and Al-Madinah, which they should know about it. But they don't know about Al-Aqsa. Because we don't tell them about it. Because we think Al-Aqsa is Palestinian. It's not a Muslim symbol. It's not a Muslim masjid. It's not my masjid. It's not mine. Well, it's good. Well, it's a blessed place because the Prophet will send there on the Isra and the Mi'raj. Well, it's good. It's a blessed place. Alhamdulillah. We prayed towards there. Yes, it's mentioned in the Quran, but okay, again, it's not important. If we continue to harbor this mentality, things will not change in terms of defending Al-Aqsa and denying them from dividing Al-Aqsa and making it, as they always aspire, to be the Temple Mount instead of being Al-Haram al-Sharif, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Jazakumullah khair.